Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into an ancient, beautifully paced narrative that has literally captivated audiences for millennia. We're talking about the story of Jonah. It's a total masterclass in storytelling, absolutely packed with dramatic irony, unexpected twists, and some seriously profound lessons. So let's break this whole thing down step by step.
Okay, let's dive into this. The entire narrative is driven by one really fascinating question. What happens when a messenger absolutely hates the message he's been given? In most ancient epics, a hero gets a divine call, and maybe after a little brief hesitation, they rise to the occasion. But here, we are looking at a brilliantly inverted hero's journey. Our protagonist doesn't just hesitate, he actively and aggressively fights his call to adventure at literally every single turn.
Section 1. The Unwanted Assignment.
So, God gives a crystal-clear command to Jonah, son of Amittai. He tells him to get up and go to the great, wicked city of Nineveh to announce judgment against it. Pretty straightforward mission, right? But instead of heading overland to Nineveh, Jonah gets up and goes in the exact opposite direction. The text actually tells us he's literally trying to get away from the Lord. He goes down to the port city of Joppa, finds a ship leaving for Tarshish, buys a ticket, and just gets on board. The irony here is incredibly thick. He's a prophet who is literally buying a boat ticket to outrun an omnipresent God. You really can't make this stuff up.
Section 2. The Violent Storm. As you might expect, you can't exactly just sail away from the Creator. God hurls this incredibly powerful wind over the sea, and we can actually track the escalating panic on this timeline, because the pacing in the text here is just wild. Within minutes, these experienced, desperate sailors are screaming to their various gods for help. As hours pass, they start chucking their precious cargo overboard just to lighten the ship and survive. And where is Jonah? Well, the captain goes down into the hold and finds our prophet sound asleep. He wakes him up, shouting at him to pray to his God. Soon after, the crew decides to cast lots to figure out whose fault this whole disaster is, and boom, the lots point directly to Jonah. Finally, the sailors interrogate him, but instead of throwing him in immediately, they row frantically to reach the land. It's only when the sea becomes entirely too violent, and they completely fail, that they finally throw Jonah overboard. It's this breathless, escalating chaos, perfectly contrasted with the sheer absurdity of a prophet taking a nap through divine judgment.
Now, what's really interesting about his interrogation is Jonah's response. They demand to know who he is and what he's done, and he replies, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." The dramatic irony here is absolutely staggering. He's proudly declaring to these terrified sailors that he worships the supreme God who created the very sea they are sailing on, while he is actively using that exact same sea to try and run away from him.
Jonah absolutely knows he's the cause of the storm. So he tells the sailors to just throw him into the sea, promising that it'll calm down. They plead with the Lord not to hold them responsible, and they toss him in. And the result is immediate. The raging sea stops instantly. The text notes that these pagan sailors were totally awestruck by the Lord's great power. They immediately offer him a sacrifice and vow to serve him. So in a weird twist, Jonah's rebellion accidentally ended up converting the entire crew. Which brings us to Section 3. Inside the Great Fish. So the Lord arranges for a great fish to swallow Jonah to save him from drowning, and he remains in there for 3 days and 3 nights. And it's from the dark confines of the fish that Jonah finally prays. And I really want us to slow down our pace here for a second, just to appreciate the incredible poetry of his desperate plea from the ocean depths. He describes being buried beneath wild and stormy waves. He says, "I sank beneath the waves. Seaweed wrapped itself around my head. I sank down to the very roots of the mountains." He is at the absolute, literal rock bottom of the earth, imprisoned in darkness. Yet as his life is slipping away, he remembers the Lord. He acknowledges that God snatched him from the jaws of death, and he vows to offer sacrifices with songs of praise. Section 4. The city repents.
Following his prayer, the fish spits Jonah right onto the beach. God commands him a second time, and Jonah finally walks into the massive city of Nineveh. So you might be wondering, what is this grand, sweeping, prophetic message that Jonah delivers? Well, it's just this one sentence. 40 days from now, Nineveh will be destroyed. That is literally it. A single, brief sentence shouted to the crowds as he enters a city so incredibly large the text notes it took 3 full days just to see it all. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer, overwhelming power of the narrative. Because despite this incredibly brief, bare minimum message, the entire city of Nineveh instantly believes God. The king actually steps down from his throne, sits in ashes, and issues this radical decree. Not only is there a strict fast of no eating or drinking for the people, but even the animals from the herds and flocks have to fast. Humans and animals alike must wear burlap, which are mourning garments. Everyone must pray earnestly and turn from their violent ways. I mean, the king of Nineveh is literally mandating that cows wear mourning clothes in a desperate hope that God might change his mind. It's bizarre, but it's powerful.
And that leads us to Section 5, the final lesson.
When God sees that Nineveh has genuinely stopped their evil ways, he actually changes his mind and spares the city. Now, you would think a prophet would be absolutely thrilled that his preaching saved tens of thousands of people, right? But Jonah, he is furious. He complains bitterly to God, saying, "Didn't I say before I left home that you would do this? That is why I ran away to Tarshish. I knew that you are a merciful and compassionate God, slow to get angry and filled with unfailing love." He is incredibly angry, so angry he asks God to just kill him right there on the spot, precisely because he knew God's nature was merciful all along. He wanted his enemies destroyed, and he absolutely hated that God was eager to forgive them.
Let's move on and see how this builds into God's final response. So Jonah goes outside the city, builds a little shelter, and basically sits down to pout, waiting to see what will happen to Nineveh. And God decides to construct a physical lesson for him right there. Step 1. God arranges for a leafy plant to grow over Jonah, shading him from the hot sun, and Jonah is, of course, very grateful for this comfort. But then, step 2, the very next morning at dawn, God sends a worm to eat through the stem, and the plant withers away. Step 3, God sends a scorching east wind and a hot sun beating down right on Jonah's head. Jonah grows faint and, once again, becomes so furious that he wishes to die, exclaiming that death is better than living like this.
So the crucial point is that God uses this to confront Jonah's anger over the dead plant. He points out a massive, glaring contradiction in his heart. Jonah feels immense sorrow and pity for a simple, leafy plant, a plant he did literally nothing to cultivate, that sprang up overnight and died just as fast. Meanwhile, God is looking at Nineveh, a city with more than 120,000 people living in total spiritual darkness, not to mention all their animals. God is visually weighing Jonah's wildly misplaced priorities, his selfish desire for personal shade, against God's overarching limitless compassion for actual human lives.
And this brings us to exactly how the source text ends. God leaves Jonah with this hanging question: shouldn't I feel sorry for such a great city? And the narrative just stops right there. It doesn't tell us Jonah's answer. It leaves this unresolved question just hanging in the air, piercing right through the ancient text and challenging us today. It forces us to reflect: how often do we value our own comfort over the lives of others? And do we ever find ourselves getting angry when mercy and grace are extended to people we deem unworthy? It's an incredibly powerful, provocative thought to end on, and for sure, a perfect testament to the brilliance of this ancient story.